Hello and welcome to a very different kind of video, I guess. Today, I decided to do an impromptu video on a very strange topic, and I know I have like my old tier list of like the D4DJ characters up because I didn't know what other visual to put up, but my video today is based on an observation that I made as we had some other events since I made the tier list. And in honor of Father's Day today, I'm gonna make a video about talking about positive male role models in D4DJ, which is kind of a thing you don't really think about that often, because you know, in a franchise that's like what 90%, maybe 95% female cast, you don't think about like, oh yeah, the male role models for these characters. And so the observation I made that inspired this video was in Nova, the Nova story, Nova Chapter 7, where we get a lot of the origins of the Abyss Mare characters. And I was thinking, like, it's so cynical, and I was thinking about how, like, wow, leave it to Japanese writers to make an American DJ unit, and like 3 out of 4 members all have like serious daddy issues. Okay, maybe 2 of them have serious daddy issues. One of them has like some daddy issues, and then, well, Sophia being in the F tier, she just has issues, period. And that was something I just thought about. I was like, huh, you know, if you contrast the Abyss Mare characters to some of the other characters in D4DJ, especially ones that have like father figures, and I use that term loosely because in some cases it's not their dads. So, for example, like Michiru, we'll talk about her a little bit, and in her case it's like her uncle who's like the father figure. And we'll talk about him a little bit when we get to it. So, first I want to talk about, like, I guess like this kind of cynicism that's in writing. Like how Japanese depict like American characters, and that was kind of what inspired me to do this impromptu video. So some of the characters in D4DJ, well, only really like 2 of them, and one of them being Yuka, who's like a caricature of an American, no, let's put this. What could Yuka technically count as? She would be like a Japan-born Caucasian, and like how she's such a caricature of how Japanese people view Caucasian people. So Yuka's very like muscle-headed, she's very brazen at times, and I know some people, I mean, it's not, once again, like, I guess in my older cynical age, you don't really care about it, you just kind of accept it as is. But I can see like people finding like huge problems with Yuka, which is actually why I bumped her in the C tier, because I can see like her not being as popular as other characters. Because if you recall, when I made this tier list, I like, sure, all the higher ranked characters, which I may even like reevaluate some of them if I have time today, but like only the top tier characters were more on my opinion, whereas other characters that I kept lower was more like a general consensus of how people viewed these characters and how the fandom kind of views these characters in general, based on more like groovy mix, a little bit of the anime. But when you get to the Abyss Mare girls, who are all supposed to be Americans, you can tell that, like, well, not just from my tier list, but there's a huge like cynical angle to how like Americans are written in Japanese media. And I mean, it's a two-way street, because the way that like Americans write about Japanese characters, it's very cynical in both ways. And you know, I could play the race card, but it's a little more than that too. And that's not something I mean, we'll talk a little bit about it, but if I were to actually go in a lot more detail, that would need its own video. But that was kind of the inspiration for this video. So let's actually talk about like how the Abyssmere girls are actually like kind of viewed as like bad characters, because, well, one, they're supposedly like the villains, quote unquote, of the D4DJ story, at least as far as the current Nova chapters. But of course, like, we haven't got Nova chapters 8 and 9 yet, which the story is trying to incorporate them into the main D4DJ narrative. And part of, you know, going forward, I assume that how Bushiroad wants to handle it is that they learn to be more accepting and learn to be better people with their time in Japan, as they become an American unit in Japan and not just like in America and try to sweep like international DJ unit, being a DJ unit in like on an international level, and not starting from America but starting in Japan, kind of thing. That's kind of how Nova Chapter 7 ended. But as I was watching, like, reading those chapters, listening, you know what I mean, I just made that, it was just so like cynical, where you like, especially with Elsie and Neo have like clear daddy issues. And so if you recall, I'll give a little summary about each story. So with Neo's origin, we learned that her father pressured her to be like her mother, to be the next Arya. And so because Neo, I mean, and this is the other thing too, where like at the story tells you that like Neo's like really young when her father like pressures her to be like the next global sensation as a singer. Neo's like really young. She's like 10 years old, at least at the start of that story arc. And then it goes on for like 5 years before her dad like basically leaves her, which is like super rough, because like, you know, that's not something you expect a teenager to deal with very well, which explains why Neo is clearly overcompensating throughout the story. And a lot of that is a product of like her serious daddy issues. And even though I rated her C tier at like before Nova, okay, so I guess I should give a reminder that when I made this tier list, it was right after Nova Chapter 5. That was several months ago. In the US, in the international servers, by the way. So I didn't have the context for like Chapter 6 and Chapter 7 of the Nova story. And that may change some of my views on a couple of the characters here. But Neo, once again, she hasn't had enough like growth since Chapter 5, because all we really see is that like, oh, we know the origins of why she's like a crappy character, and it's because, you know, daddy issues. But it was something interesting to see that like that was kind of the approach that the D4DJ writers went with to write why Neo is a very cynical person. And that's because she has these unresolved traumas with her father, basically. Now, of course, we don't know. I mean, I haven't read Chapter 8 yet because it's not out as of making this video. So we don't know how much Neo's character is going to change. I assume it's not going to change that much in one chapter. But as long as Neo has these unresolved issues, her parental issues, daddy issues, she's going to stay relatively lower tier because she lacks certain likable qualities. And part of that is, oh, you know, like she has to shield herself. She's not willing to be vulnerable, emotionally vulnerable because of that. And I mean, I mean, to be fair though, that is how it is in real life. If you meet people, especially women who have a lack of good male role models, they tend not to be very good at expressing themselves emotionally. And, you know, armchair psychologist moment, but I think one of the things that many people forget is that how important it is for women to have positive male role models. I mean, that's why we're talking about it on Father's Day. And so, especially when like a lot of the characters in D4DJ are usually only children. Actually, quite a number of them are like only children. We have like Saki, who's an only child. Mooney's an only child. Saori's an only child. Miyu's an only child. Hayate's an only child. Rinku's an only... No, Rinku's not an only child. Kyoko's an only child. I think Noah's an only child. So, like, I'm not... That's, like, half the list, and I already named, like, 5 characters. And Dahlia's an only child. Aoi, Tsubaki, only children. And then, like, 3 of the Abyss Mare girls are all only children, which I think adds to the whole, like, daddy issues thing. So, like, Elsie's an only child. Noah's an only child. And Sophia's an only child. Did I say Noah? I meant Neo. I think Veronica's the only one with siblings. She has like a bunch of younger siblings. And actually, for a moment, let's contrast Veronica, or Veronica. I'm gonna call it Veronica because I suck at the whole pronouncing Veronica with a W. But when you compare Veronica with Neo, you learn that like Veronica has like some estrangement with her dad. Well, more accurately, her dad is kind of a crappy person in that he's basically an alcoholic. But the difference between Veronica and Neo is that since Veronica has like a bunch of younger siblings, she kind of takes it upon herself to mature so that she can care for her siblings in lieu of her father being like an alcoholic. Because one of the funny things you learn is that Veronica learned how to sing from her dad, which makes it sound like he's a decent dad, but then you find out that like he's drunk like 90% of the time, which I guess it goes to show that Veronica has talent because she can learn how to sing from like a drunk while he's drunk. And so it adds a... It makes me have a respect for Veronica, which I actually might bump her up. Up here you go. Because it shows that Veronica has a maturity despite the fact that she has like a crappy upbringing. And of course in Nova Chapter 7, it explores that like she grew up in the hood kind of thing. But still manages to be like not totally toxic and not a crappy character. Because she possesses that maturity, despite in lieu of not having an actual father figure around. Now Elsie, though, let's talk about her a little bit and her serious daddy issues. Because you learn that, like, there's a whole, like, how do I put this? There's a... It's not exactly like an inferiority complex. It's not exactly that. It's more like a kind of fear, if you will, of like her father's position. And apparently, like in universe, her father's like supposedly someone of like great influence. Whether he's like some kind of international businessman or something, we're not totally clear on what he does. But basically, because of his influence, people like are always walking on eggshells with him. And so Elsie kind of developed that mindset. That already tells you that like, oh, you know, this is not a good relationship if the child has to walk around eggshells with their own parents. And then of course, like, when Elsie gets inspired by Neo to like stand up to her dad, she like takes it in the worst way. So basically she like, I can't remember how exactly she like finds some dirt on her dad and then like blackmails him basically. Like that is just awful. Yeah, Elsie's she's terrible. Let's just put it that way. And I mean, I guess you could say on her father's part, you reap what you sow. So he himself is probably uses his influence to instill fear in others. I guess if Elsie learned anything from her dad, it was how to instill fear in other people, and that's kind of how Elsie's character is. And you know, when I first rated her as a B tier, there was that whole like, she was kind of cool because of like the whole girl boss thing, but then you find out that like, oh, the origins of that are super dark, and it really shows like Elsie is willing to be extremely manipulative. So yeah, clearly like, just how do I put this? The results of like unresolved parental issues just like bleeds out in how she relates with every other character. And yeah, and you know, cute anime girl style, it has a bit of charm to it. But in actuality, like if you actually met a person like Elsie in real life, you would like come to hate her pretty quick. But then you'd be too scared to do anything because, you know, she would just manipulate everyone around you to like gaslight you. And that's the kind of person you should, you know, you would naturally be very afraid of. So, down you go. Because I don't know if I want to deal with creepy, manipulative youngsters like Elsie. So, Veronica goes up, Elsie goes down. And Sophia, you stay in F tier. Your origin only makes it worse. So with that said, I know I just gave a lot of criticism of bad dads. Because Abyssmare, they kind of reflect like the kind of awful people you can produce by having bad male role models. But as I made that observation, I also observed that a lot of some of the characters in D4DJ have like really good male role models. And I kind of want to give a praise to them, even though like once again, like D4DJ's 95% female cast, including side characters. So the few male characters, they gotta leave an impression. And some of them really do. And I also made the observation, if you look at my tier list here, a lot of the characters that are rated higher tend to have pretty good like male role models. So let's talk with Best Girl Saki. With Best Girl Saki, we learned that in... I remember what episode it is. I want to say it's episode 8 of All Mix. Someone can correct me on this if I'm incorrect. I think it's episode 8 of All Mix. The one where Photon Maiden and Lyrical Lily, they do the training camp thing. And even though like Groovy Mix kind of... like Groovy Mix mentions this from time to time, what makes it neat in All Mix is that Saki really like spells this out. One, because Miyu would not know this, and secondly, for the audience, it really gives a lot more insight into Saki's past. And of course, I mean, that's relevant in the episode because something that Saki's looking for as she wants to change the direction of Photon Maiden, at least in the anime's continuity, as I mentioned before, the anime and Groovy Mix have like different continuities. Somewhat. Like the continuity splits, I guess is a better way of wording it. But going with All Mix's continuity, we really get a deeper insight into Saki's relationship with her father. And the way that Saki paints him is like, her dad must have been a really good role model. One, because before Saki became a DJ, she wanted to be an astronomer like her father. And then of course, something that's kind of charming is that you learn that Saki actually has like a lot of manual skills. Like she can chop wood and she knows like camping skills and things like that. Because she obviously spent a lot of time with her father who did a lot of camping so they could go stargazing. And I think that was actually really charming. And then that had me thinking about how, like, part of what makes Saki a great character is that she had a great male role model, and that she aspires to be like him. But at the same time, Saki possesses her own like desires to do something else, and we don't know this for sure. It's kind of implied that her family's very supportive of her because she joins Photon Maiden and then she moves out of home at the age of 16, 15 technically, because she became part of Photon Maiden before first mix begins. So they would have been first years, which would have made her like 16. So if she moved out before then she would be like 15 or something. But anyway, yeah, so just talk about how Saki had a great male role model, and her dad appears to be a great guy. Supportive, and inspires her a lot in her interests. Which is, you know, the litmus of a good dad. Another character that we have like a good male role model, and once again, like 2 S-tier characters having male role models is Maho as well. Now Maho's father only really appears in the what's it called? Let me look this up so I'm not just spewing random names here. But I'll try to explain what it is. So when you look up your character stories, they have like the card stories, and then they have like another character story that's like focused on them. It's just the character story. And in episode, I think it's episode 2? No, okay, so it's episode number 1, and in a secretive big sister. We actually get a little bit of like Maho's domestic life. And I might as well explore this more, because I totally like botched this up when I did my original tier list, so here's my take 2 on it. I didn't mention, because I got so distracted about how like Maho's kind of charming and cute because she's a little bit oblivious. But what I should have mentioned of another reason why she's an S tier character is that Maho was kind of created to be likable. And similar to when I rated Marika as an A rank, Maho is the rock of Happy Around, because all the other Happy Around girls, there's like clear character flaws. So Mooney's, you know, overly self-absorbed. Ray possesses a lot of insecurities about her life, and Rinku's your typical meathead. So Maho had to be like the heart and the rock of the group. And then of course what First Mix did very well was that Maho was presented to be very likable. She's very understanding, she's very kind, she's generous. You know, great characters in anybody that you would look for and like what you would want as a friend. And Maho possesses all these qualities. And then on top of that, as Groovy Mix explores other parts of Maho's like life, her personality and her like domestic skills and stuff like that, Maho was like designed to be like very likable. Hell, there's even that one moment, I can't remember, it was one of the Peaky events, and there was a whole funny thing about how like the Peaky girls are talking about Maho and her like cooking skills. And then Yuka makes a comment about how Maho's like wife material. So yeah, like Bushy Road wanted you to know that like Maho is like best girl kind of thing. But anyway, in A Secretive Big Sister, which was one of Maho's character stories, we get a little bit of insight into her domestic life, and we learn that even though Maho's father is like busy with his work, because apparently he's a firefighter, he does all kinds of things to support Maho in her desire to be like into music. And so, like wanting to be a DJ and stuff like that. And I guess like, I don't know if this is an accurate observation, but it's very possible that like her father being into music himself, because it's implied, I'm going to assume that the man that Maho is with in the flashback you see in the first episode of First Mix, that guy is her father. Of course you don't see his face, but the guy that she's with is her father. And so in a way, like, he's the one who inspired her, quote unquote, to become a DJ, because Maho was at some D-Fest in the past. And then he's supportive of her as like Maho really gets into like DJing. And so even though, like, once again, it's one of those things that's like tough to write because, of course, a lot of these characters, their dads aren't often around because their dads are busy working and, you know, being breadwinners. But despite that, you learn that Maho's father is really supportive of her. And that probably contributes to why Maho is so responsible and able to be a responsible adult. The next father figure we have is not an actual dad, but a granddad. And that would be with Shinobu. Now, Shinobu's dad is around in the story a little bit, but he doesn't really do that much. There's not enough, like, character dialogue he has, if any. I don't think he does, actually. But in Shinobu's stories, we learn that her male role model is her grandfather. Now, I can't remember his name for the life of me at the moment, but of course, like, what makes him a major, like, father figure in Shinobu's life is one, Shinobu wants to be like him. And that basically tells you all you need to know. So, of course, her grandfather was a famous DJ. And so, for Shinobu to follow in his steps, and you learn in both first mix as well as groovy mix that how like Shinobu got started in like remixing and DJ music, I guess, at a very early age because like she saw her grandfather do it and then she wanted to do it and she would play in his workshop and then learn how to do it, and then after her grandfather taught her how to mix music, Shinobu really like took off with it, and she was like, she desires to be like him. And so that already tells you enough. And so once again, Shinobu gets to be a high tier character, and her grandfather plays a big part. Of course, he is a bigger male character compared to other like male characters in D4DJ. So Shinobu has an unfair advantage like that, or rather her grandfather does. Now the next character we can talk about, like some kind of father-daughter relationship, is with, I'm going to pick an odd character next, and that's going to be Esura. I guess we need a little break from all the good male role models to learning male role models, I guess you could say. And Esura and Shinobu's relation event, there's an interesting observation that's made in that Esura, part of her like isolated nature, or let's put it this way, with her whole like lovely obsession, is kind of her overcompensating because Esura feels lonely a lot of the times, and what we learn is that that's because her parents didn't really like give her a lot of attention as she was growing up. And so I guess like Esura gets bumped down a little bit in the tier list, and she I know a lot of people don't like the whole like she overcompensates thing, but I mean that's just the fruits of what happens when you have neglectful parents. Is that it creates this kind of unhealthy personality in Esura of like overcompensating for things. But of course, like as the story goes on, after like that relation event between Esura and Shinobu, Esura tends to be the much more mature one when we get to the Esura and Rei relation event. And that's another, let's move on to Rei actually. And Rei also has the same problem that Esura does, except Rei doesn't like handle it as well. But of course, Esura's maturity, which we could bump up Esura to B tier if I really wanted to. But Esura's maturity shows when she confronts like Rei's mom. But I will give some points to Rei's dad though. And Rei has a pretty like interesting dad compared to a lot of the other characters. In what is the event actually called? I don't just want to call it their relation event. Give me a sec here. in what's it called? The Sweet Time Drift. Sweet Time Drifts Lazily story. We learned that. Well, we learned the reason for like Rei's insecurities and how she dropped out of like playing piano seriously because she felt too much pressure from her mom to like get into a higher end music school and to pursue like piano like as a career seriously. But what you learn is that Rei's dad, I mean, part of the problem is that like he on the one hand, he's not the best dad because he kind of takes the back seat, and this is one of those things of like general Asian culture, which I'll talk about a little bit, but once again, if I already go in a lot of detail, it would take like a whole video. But a lot of the characters, even when they have dads, they also have what some people would call a tiger mom. Now, a tiger mom is basically when this typically happens in like Asian families where since the dad tends to be busy with work, the mom takes she kind of dominates the parental roles. And so you find that like a lot of people get like a lot of pressure from their mothers, and this is true in some of the D4DJ girls, Marika being one of them, where there's a lot more pressure from their mothers, and then Rei being a clear example of this as well. And then the dad's kind of like, he wants to support his daughter, but he kind of can't really do a good job at it, because of course the mom is the one who kind of dominates everything. And so in Rei's case, we kind of see this to be the case, that her dad wants to be supportive of her. Rei's dad wants to be like, he even asks her in Time Drifts Lazily, what do you want, Rei? Is kind of what her dad asks. What do you want? And Rei doesn't know how to answer him, because of course the big problem Rei has is that she's insecure. That's the whole point of the story. And so that was, I think, like, part of Rei's weakness comes from that lack of like a strong male figure in her life. She is indecisive because her own father is kind of indecisive himself. Now you kind of got to see this trend that I have going on here, is that as higher tier characters on this list, they tend to be influenced by strong male role models. Now that's not true in all cases. For instance, well, when I rated Rinku as a B tier, I mean, once again, I could easily bump her up to A tier, because when I first made the tier list, the reason why I put Rinku as B was like to make a standard. And so like all your B tiers are good, but even though I wow, can't speak English. Even though I like all the characters in B list quite a bit, B tier, in order to be out of the B tier, like to move up, you have to have something that stands out to me. And a number of these characters do. But Rinku has a great personality, and that's why people like her so much. And what's funny is Rinku's bit of trivia. Rinku's dad is the only character that we actually see him, because in All Mix, I think it's the final episode of All Mix, there's like, it shows you a bit of Rinku's family, her parents, and then like we get to see what her dad looks like. And then of course in the side Nova story of Happy Around, when the Happy Around girls go to Tio Tio Island and they actually meet Rinku's parents, he's actually voiced, because of course he was voiced in the anime, so why wouldn't he be voiced in Groovy Mix? And he's actually an interesting character as well, because one of the things that's tough for Rinku is that since her parents are like researchers in Africa, she doesn't get to be around her parents very often. But you can tell that like Rinku maintains a positive attitude, and her parents foster that quite a bit. And so we have to give, you know, her father, you know, his share of the work. And what makes him like a pretty good father figure is that he knows his daughter. And in the beginning of the final episode of All Mix, when Rinku's mother asks about like, oh, do you think Rinku will like the gift that we got her? Her dad goes, well, of course she will. She's always loved seashells, and of course she will love this one as well. And it shows that like he knows his daughter. And Rinku having this like positive relation with her parents, even though she's so far away because they're in Africa and she's in Japan. It shows that like even distance doesn't stop Rinku's parents from being good parents, and you know, her dad gets the credit for his credit. And so Rinku also is a good father figure. Now, a funny thing, I guess the next character we'll talk about when it comes to like male role model, this will be the last dad figure I'll talk about, and that'll be Michiru. Now, once again, it's not exactly like her dad, but it's the father figure in her life is I think his name is Haruko. Is that his name? Her uncle. And this is where like he got points, was when we read Nova chapter 6. So Nova chapter 6 is the part where in chapter 5 the Unicord girls break up. Because there's like a difference of ideology between the members, and then Lumina constantly pressuring the other girls to like just be better. But of course the issue is that Lumina is inconsiderate of their feelings. In chapter 6, we get a little bit of backstory to Michiru. And of course the point of that backstory was to show like, why does Michiru want to be a DJ? And what we learned there is that Michiru had it pretty rough, because Michiru has a very extravagant personality. Like Michiru is she's an all or nothing character. All or nothing kind of character. She either goes all in or she doesn't do anything at all. And that's where like her indecisiveness in chapter 5 led to conflict, because she wasn't sure which path to take, even though she's supposed to be the leader of Unicord. But anyway, in the beginning of chapter 6, we get some backstory of Michiru and how she wanted to like... One of the problems she had was when she tried to make friends, a lot of the girls she tried to be friends with couldn't... They couldn't keep up with Michiru's passion for music. And so people just like kind of stop hanging out with her because they're like, oh, you know, like Michiru's too much kind of thing. And then as this kept happening to Michiru, she lost confidence in herself, and she felt embarrassed because she couldn't like maintain friends. But her uncle was someone that was very supportive. I don't want to use that word over and over. But he was not only supportive, but he was someone that was able to understand her and comfort her quite a lot, and to really care for his niece. And because of this, Michiru maintains her confidence throughout the story. And of course, it is that same confidence that allows her to really push forward in how to present Unicord when D-Fest America occurs. And of course, it is Michiru who saves the day at the end of chapter 7, after Abyssmare has their whole fumbling because, you know, Neo and her daddy issues manifesting themselves on stage. Oof. But it is Michiru's confidence that saves the day. And there's an interesting contrast between Michiru and Neo. Even though the story kind of implies of like this kind of rivalry between like Lumina, who's in Neo's mind the the real rebirth of her mother. So yeah, like that's kind of the weird route the story went with. But there's an interesting contrast between Michiru and Neo, and is that Michiru is very confident. She knows who she is, and I think a part of that comes from her uncle, because he was someone that reminded her, like, no, your love for music is who you are, and if that's, you know, that's nothing to be ashamed of. There's nothing to be ashamed of, is what he tells her, and that's why, as Michiru becomes, you know, the leader of Unicorn, she herself, she is not embarrassed. She embraces that part of herself, and the encouragement from her uncle really like spotlights like Michiru's character. I'm almost tempted to put her in A tier, because Michiru just, like, I don't know, her saving the day in Nova Chapter 7 made me like her a lot more. I really like her. We'll bump Lamina down though, I'm sorry. Stagnant personality has to be bumped down. There's not enough in Lumina to be like good enough for A rank. But Michiru definitely A rank, because she saved the day and is a total badass. Now we could talk about some of the other characters, but I kind of feel like this is enough content for the most part. Like, we could talk about like Miyu and her father, but her father's kind of like, we can tell that her father really like cares for her and supports her with, like, you know, hiring her personal maids kind of thing, like Saori being her personal maid. And of course, like, her father being not just caring of her, but of a Saori as well. So Saori kind of has like a father figure in Miyu's dad. And then of course, like, some of the other characters that like have father figures. Like Aoi has an interesting father figure after we went through the whole side nova of Rondo. But I think I'll just leave that one alone for now. TLDR, like, obviously, we would say that Aoi has a good father figure, but then, like, that's displayed through his death, and it's kind of like, oof, you know? And it's unfortunate we don't get to see more. But of course, you could also make the whole thing about, like, Aoi's uncle. And he's an interesting father figure as well, because he really wanted to care for Aoi, but of course, Aoi's aunt and uncle, they were conflicted with their feelings, because they were like, oh, we wish Aoi was actually our child, but we can't what's the word I'm thinking of? We can't besmirch the wishes of Aoi's actual, like, birth parents. And so there's that interesting dynamic. And then of course what makes Aoi's character just shine is that Aoi accepts that, like, her aunt and uncle is like, well, you are my parents. You're the ones who have loved me all these years and raised me. And so, I mean, there's points there to Aoi's parents. There's not much else to say. Like, I know Kyoko's dad is kind of like a nice guy, but there's not a lot to say about him. So I think that's all the, like, father figures that actually have like a notable role in the story, because like Marika's dad is kind of around, but he's kind of like a passive character, because Marika has like a total tiger mom. Kyoko's dad is around a little bit, but he doesn't do that much, to my knowledge. And so, actually, a funny thing about Kyoko's dad is that Kyoko's the typical, like, if she wants something and her mom says no, she just goes to her dad, and her dad will be like, sure, honey. Kind of one of those funny things. But that's all. That's most of the characters and their male role models. We will give a special honorable mention, even though today's Father's Day. We're going to talk about a character who's not a father, but is a phenomenal male role model. And that character is Rika's brother. Now, even though he's not a father per se, he is Rika's role model. And so we'll kind of count him for this video, because after all, I did allow like Shinobu's grandfather and Michiru's uncle. But at least there's a generational divide. In Shinobu's case, 2 generations. But Rika's brother is an interesting male role model. And what makes him a good role model is that he's the kind of guy that like he puts others before himself. And so what makes him so admirable is that he always cares for Rika and he thinks about her first, which is, you know, a parental trait. You know, part of being a good parent is that you give so much for your children so that your children can have a good future. And Rika's brother kind of does this, and he really encourages Rika to live a good life. And in the relation event with Rika and Tsubaki, what you learn there is that Rika's personality is actually like she's inspired by her brother. And of course Rika herself mentions that like she looks up to him, even though he's, well, for the longest time he's bedridden, so, and he's often sick. So but despite this, the guy maintains like a positive attitude. And something that's kind of funny, as you read the, well, because he's not voiced in Groovy Mix, and you read his dialogue, he talks like a punk. Like, he uses a lot of like colloquial speaking, and that's kind of where Rika picks it up from. So she even talks like him, even though once again you don't actually hear him actually talk because he's not voiced. But when you read his dialogue, you find that Rika talks like him too. And so, I mean, that's an S tier role model right there. You know, your sister imitates you in every way that she can. And so that's my honorable mention to him as like a good father figure. But once again, they're siblings. But he's an S tier male role model. Anyway, so that's gonna be today's video. Wow, I managed to be like 45 minutes of me rambling. But I did want to revisit this tier list a little bit, as well as talk about good male role models. And something you don't think about too often is talking about male role models in a series that's primarily female cast. But part of, I guess, a little bit of writing 101 is when you're doing world building, you have to consider like external relationships between characters and characters beyond your main cast. So in this case, like in D4DJ, a lot of these characters have like family members because everybody has family members. And how those family members, even though they're not present very much in the main story, they still influence the character that you have. And of course, good world building knows how to utilize familial relations like that. Because for instance, going back with Saki, you never see her dad, but any time that Saki mentions him, she always speaks of him extremely highly. And I mean, that's part of how you got to do world building in your writing. And to do it well is not easy. But even with that said, though, and this is a credit to Bushiroad's writing. I mean, to be fair, D4DJ, like D4DJ is one of their much later creations, so they've had practice with their other franchises. But I do admire the way that they actually handle male role models in D4DJ with their characters, because in a 95% all-female cast, to include male characters, you got to make them stand out if you want them to be relevant at all. And D4DJ managed to pull that off pretty well. So, that's my impromptu D4DJ / Father's Day video. Is it a weird one? Absolutely. But, I mean, if it's not a weird video, can this even be called the streaming parson? I don't know. But, anyway, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Happy Father's Day. And don't forget to thank the male role models in your life for making you better. At least that's my assumption. That's my hope as well, that you know, your male role models, your fathers especially, have been inspirational to you. Anyways, this is it. I'll see you guys tomorrow for Triangle Strategy at 2 o'clock. Bye.